yourself to be a perfectionist? Obviously, if you've been drawn to this video, you might have some of those tendencies. Now, a dance career requires us to pay attention to technique development, artistic development, to a degree that can be pretty intense. Is that a bad thing? Is perfectionism always something that's destructive, or can it be helpful to us? Now, it won't surprise you to know that the research into the topic of perfectionism explores that very question. Is it a good thing? Is it destructive? And what we see is that there's really a line that can be crossed where we move from something that could be viewed as a healthy, conscious striving for excellence that can tip over into something that becomes very self-destructive. And it really can become debilitating for some. In this video, we're going to start looking at some of those jigsaw pieces that lead us into that perfectionist tendency, where that line really exists. And then in the second part of this video, we'll start to look at what are practical strategies that we can use to help us stay on the right side of that equation. Let's have a look first of all at where this line lies between something that is actually useful to us to motivate us to succeed versus something that's turning into a more destructive process. In the literature on perfectionism, you'll find there are two terms that are often applied to perfectionism. Let's take a look. These terms are adaptive and maladaptive. Adaptive perfectionism is something that is useful to us. It's actually motivating us to move forwards and be the best we can be. Maladaptive is when that behaviour has tipped over into something that becomes almost obsessive for us and leads to a degree of stress that is not going to be helpful for our health or for even achieving our goals. Let's first of all look at that adaptive version of events. So this is what we would describe as a healthy pursuit of excellence. You want to be really good at what you do, and so you're driving yourself, but your motivation is coming from enthusiasm. I often say to dancers, do you remember when you were a little kid and you just wanted to put music on at home and fling yourself around in the living room, and you didn't care whether it was technically perfect or whether anybody was critiquing your skills? You just derived a joy from the ability to move your body through space. Your efforts produced joy and satisfaction, and you weren't trying to earn any external respect by impressing anybody else. That's that element that probably led us into our dance career, and it's what often gets lost at some point. If we're able to stay with that sense of joy and satisfaction, we're going to view failure as an opportunity for growth and learning. We're not going to see challenges as roadblocks. We're going to see them as necessary parts of our development, which they really are. Nobody learned anything from being perfect. It's when we meet challenges and overcome them that we develop the skills that are necessary. We're not afraid to make mistakes, and what's key is we're not afraid to be vulnerable. Now, we're always vulnerable. Often when people come to me for working on anxiety, wanting to manage their anxiety, they're often thinking that the absence of anxiety is actually about being in control. And it's not. It's actually about being comfortable with vulnerability. Because we're always vulnerable. There could be a huge storm that blows up, an earthquake. We never know what's going to happen in the next second. The question is, are we okay with that? And can we adapt? Looking at that word adaptive, are we able to adapt to any situation that arises? I often say to dance students when they're training for a career, when you go on stage, you might think you're in control of what you're doing, but there could be a million other things that go on around you. Another dancer may fall over. Somebody's phone may go off in the wings. A bit of scenery may fall over. Anything can go on. We need to be able to shift and adapt so that we can cover for those things. I call it fudging, right? Can you fudge over that so that nobody noticed that anything went wrong? When dancers come in, I used to teach pre-professional level, college level dance, and I would say to those students, I'm not here to teach you to be perfect. I'm here to teach you how to dig yourself out of a hole because the holes are going to appear and we need the skills to be able to work around them. How many times have I been in a performance on stage and either I messed up or something went on around me that caused a bit of fluctuation in the performance? And maybe I had somebody in watching that night and they'd come round after the show and I would say, oh my goodness, did you see when that whole thing happened? There was all this drama. And they were like, oh, I didn't notice. Right? Because you're able to paper over the cracks and adapt to any given situation. When we know we have the tools to adapt to anything, we don't need to be stressed. Okay, so that's that adaptive category. Now let's flip over and look at the maladaptive category. In some of the research, and it's something that I agree with, the term perfectionism is reserved for the maladaptive version of this. I would say that the adaptive version is just that healthy pursuit of excellence, and that the term perfectionism really should be reserved for when we're in this maladaptive and destructive side of events. There's a lot of argument around that, but that's just kind of what lands for me. So in this maladaptive category, we see that we're being motivated by a fear of failure. Not the joy of succeeding, but the fear of messing up. Our efforts don't produce satisfaction. We're always in this self-criticism. Oh, it was never good enough. Oh, I didn't like what I did today. And we feel the need to impress others to earn our own self-respect. And that's a very precarious place. We all know as dancers, we're constantly comparing ourselves to others. We're constantly worried about what our teacher may think, what our parents may think, what the director or choreographer may think, what the audience may think, what the critics are going to say in the journals tomorrow. We're looking for things outside of us to make us feel good about ourselves, and that's not healthy, and we'll dive into that a little bit more in a moment. If you make a mistake, if you have something that you view as a failure or a challenge, you don't just feel that I just messed up that combination. You feel like you failed as a human being, that you're not good enough, not that you were just having a bad day. You think you must always be in control of your emotions. It comes back to that vulnerability idea. If you're in the maladaptive category, you feel like the only way that you can manage anxiety is to control everything. But again, that's precarious. You can't control everything. You need to be able to roll with the punches and shift and adapt to whatever comes your way and know that it won't affect your sense of self underneath. Those are the two categories and the sorts of elements that go with each, and maybe you might see yourself reflected in some of these. And often we can swing between the two. We're not in one all the time or the other. And, sometimes we're feeling good about ourselves and we're in that adaptive category, and other times we fall into the maladaptive one. But now we know where that line is, we can be more aware of when we're tipping over into that unhealthy bracket so we can do something about it. Let's look at motivation, because this is really what's underneath those two categories we looked at. How are we motivating ourselves? Now, motivation falls again into two categories. We have extrinsic motivation and we have intrinsic motivation. The extrinsic motivation is the carrot and stick approach, and it's typically how a lot of us were trained. Dance training historically has been all about that striving towards some external goal. I want to get the approval of my teacher. I want to win a trophy. I want to book that audition, get into that particular school, get into that company. That's about seeking rewards. Again, rewards are outside of our control. It's also about avoiding failure. Remember that fear of failure. I want to do well because I'm terrified of that failure because it makes me feel like I'm a bad person. All these things are about pleasing others, and they are outside of your ability to control. And that, again, is a precarious place to be. If we look at the intrinsic version of events, this is again where we're achieving for the joy and satisfaction of having done well. Even if it was a really tough class and you didn't figure everything out and you messed up a few things, you still have that satisfaction of, you know what, I worked really hard and I pushed myself. Yeah, I didn't hit everything, but that's okay. The activity itself is the reward, not the outcome of the activity. That's in your control. That is about developing self-satisfaction. And really what's underneath our ability to be in either of these categories, the extrinsic or the intrinsic, is really about our level of self-worth, our value, our self-esteem. Those are all sort of terms that are used to describe how we value ourselves. And that really comes from having a good sense of your own identity. Now, let's have a look at that. Identity is typically derived from having a lovely, diverse expression of ourselves in many, many different ways. We often put that into a pie chart where we're looking at different aspects of our life and how we fill our identity in those different aspects. And often we'll say that a healthy self-identity comes from having a multicoloured wheel that makes up who we are. But let's have a look at this wheel through the lens of a very dedicated dancer who's all about the dance career. How often do dancers identify themselves with what they do, not who they are? Let's start at 12 o'clock on our little pizza wheel here and look at the fun category. Okay, you're a dancer. You love dancing. Your fun comes from doing dance class, going to dance shows. Everything's about dance. So you derive fun from things that are dance related. Career. You want to have a career in dance. Maybe you have a career in dance. You're focused on having that ability to support yourself coming from a dance career. Health. Well, I'm all about learning how to keep myself healthy and not be injured as a dancer. I want to fuel myself for my dance career. So your health is all about supporting your dance career. Personal life. Well, pretty much everyone I'm around is a dancer because I only have time for dance because it takes so much of my time. Therefore, my personal life is really about dance. And if I'm not in the studio or on stage, I'm normally following other dancers on Instagram or I'm going out to see other people perform. So even my personal social life is about identity of a dancer. Friends. My friends are all dancers because they're the only people I meet because I never have time to meet anyone outside of the profession. Your environment. I spend most of my days in a dance studio or in a performance space or in the dressing room, so my environment is all dance related. Finances. I earn my living from being a dancer, or I'm spending money on training to be a dancer, so the finances are all wrapped up in dance. Romance. Well, I never really meet anyone outside the dance world, so my partner is also a dancer. So we start to see that wheel becomes all one colour. And again, this is precarious. What if some event happened that meant that as of tomorrow, a dance career is off the table for you, for whatever reason. Who are you? Who are you without that label of, I am a dancer? I often see this with dancers who are retiring later in life. They're suddenly like, that's it, I'm done, I'm moving on, my body's had enough. But coming into that sense of, well, who am I now? When people say to you, oh, what do you do? We all like to label each other, right? Oh, what do you do? I'm a dancer. Most people go, oh, wow, that's really interesting. You kind of get applause for that label. When someone asks you now, who are you or what do you do? I don't know. I don't know who I am without that label of dancer. This really is something that is worth exploring because our health depends upon it. Our level of security of self-worth is what helps damp down the stress in our bodies, and stress is directly correlated with physical challenges. When we think about stress, stress is not a thought, it's not a series of facts, it's a feeling. Check out the anxiety series of videos where I'll walk you through how our thoughts and emotions affect our physiology and therefore our health. Having a good sense of self means you really need to explore who you are as a human being who happens to dance. Another aspect of perfectionism that a lot of people don't connect the dots to is something called procrastination. Do you like to put things off? Did you know that that's very much linked to perfectionism? Why is putting things off related to perfectionism? Well, let's look at that ladder. Perfectionism, as we've talked about, leads often to that fear of failure. Therefore, if you've got a task that needs doing, say you're in school and you've got a paper due and it's due at midnight on Friday, and you've known this for weeks maybe, that's the deadline for this paper, and you've been like, yeah, I'll do it later. Oh yeah, I've still got time. You're putting it off because you know that once you've done it, you're going to start judging it, right? So we often will put it off to avoid doing the thing that we then want to criticize. And that can often lead to a form of paralysis. And so you leave it till the very last minute and then you end up in this complete stress ball because you're struggling to get it done by that deadline. But you know that if you submit it at 11:59 on the day of that deadline, once it's gone, that's it. That's this wheel of procrastination that we tend to get in. So let's look at that wheel. Starting at the top there, self-criticism. This is a big feature of perfectionism. You don't need anyone outside you to be critiquing you. You do it to yourself, right? Not good enough. Oh, I didn't do that well enough. Oh, I misspelt this thing on the paper, whatever it might be. You have that fear of failure, which is driving the self-criticism. That leads to loss of confidence. You're not confident in your skills. You're not confident that you can do a good job of this thing, so you put it off. It leads to anxiety. So we've got all this stress going on in the body. The anxiety will actually amplify your fear of failure. Check out the anxiety videos to see why this is the case. You're then going to avoid the task because that allows you to avoid the feeling of anxiety. And we're back into this wheel of self-criticism, fear of failure, anxiety, avoid the thing, and then you avoid the anxiety. But at some point, you have to do the thing, and then you criticize it. So you see this wheel you get into. Getting ourselves out of this is all about breaking cycles. And that's what we're going to get into in part 2 of this perfectionism series. Now, often people think that the path to achievement and success is a straight ladder upwards. I'm just going to get better and better and better and better. I'm never going to mess up and then I win the trophy. But all the research into perfectionism and the development of creative talent, all of it shows that the bumpy road is best. If you've never met a challenge, if you've never fallen into a pothole, you don't develop the skills to deal with it. We call this developing the skills to handle adversity. Adversity is going to come. We talked about the fact that we are vulnerable. Even if you've done a perfect performance, there might be something that happens around you that messes up your performance and is completely outside your control. If you've never had that experience, then you can often end up like a rabbit in the headlights if a bit of scenery falls down when you're dancing and you just freeze. I don't know what to do here. That's shocked me. Whereas if you've always had adverse things happening around you, you're like, okay, just work around that. If I really kind of smile and pull the focus over to me, perhaps the audience won't notice. Or is there some way I can incorporate what's just happened into my performance? And you need to be alert to do that. If you're in a stress response, all your kind of cognitive abilities, the ability to think your way out of a situation, goes offline and you become the rabbit in the headlights. So every time you meet a challenge, whether it's in class or in performance or just in general life, you now can go, great, that's an opportunity to develop skills to handle it. I'm the weird teacher in class that if you mess up a turn, for instance, I'm going to say, great, let's figure it out. What went wrong? What were the breadcrumb steps that led that turn to collapse at the end? And let's figure it out, because that's going to help you develop the skills to stop that happening again. If you fell to the left at the end of the turn, well, obviously you pushed to the left as you took off. Was there something in your takeoff that we can analyse to figure out why you landed off to the left after that turn? Use any challenges as an opportunity to develop the skills to handle adversity, and don't demonize them and blame yourself for something going wrong. We're going to get into this more in part 2, but embrace that bumpy road. That's the route to success. Just to finish off this video, when you're going into a class situation, if you're going into a performance situation, be mindful of what is the self-talk you are taking into that situation. What is the emotional baggage that you might be dragging behind you like a lead weight? As dancers, we are typically not always the kindest to ourselves with our self-talk. We don't need the teacher to yell at us. We don't need the audience to criticise what we just did if we're doing it to ourselves. We become our own predator and prey, and that's just silly. Be mindful of your self-talk. Are you speaking to yourself the way you would speak to your best friend? Often that answer is no in dancers. Let's make sure that whenever we go into our dance situation, that we clean all of that up. Our nervous system likes to bunch things together. And if you always go into class, say, and go into that self-criticism mode, your nervous system, every time you step into a dance studio, goes, oh, so the dance studio is the place where we criticise ourselves. Let's do that. Just as you repeat things in class to get better at it, the same applies to your emotions and your thoughts. If you keep criticising yourself in the dance studio, you'll get better at it. We need to break that cycle. I always say there's typically in a dance studio, there's a trash can and it's often by the door. Often in the wings or in your dressing room in performance, there's a trash can. Put your emotional baggage, put all the self-criticism in the trash before you go into the dance situation. You can pick it up on the way out if there's stuff you need to figure out there, but don't bring it into your class or performance situation, because your nervous system is going to bundle those together and then they become harder and harder to separate. And as you will see if you watch the anxiety series, having emotional stress in your system actually increases your risk of injury. The physical and emotional are not separate. Let's get that off the table. Every time you are criticizing yourself in your head, you are producing a stress response that tightens your muscles and produces inflammation. You are now in a state where when you do that big kick, that on a day when you're feeling very chilled and relaxed, your leg will sail up to that position with no problem. If you are stressed, your muscles tighten, and now when you do that kick, you can damage the muscle. That's why we just need to leave it in the wings. Don't bring your emotional baggage into the class or performance situation. That was just an exploration of what underlies the perfectionism tendency and some of the consequences of it. In the second part of this series, we'll look at some practical strategies that you can use to help break the chain, break that cycle of perfectionism so you can get back to just enjoying what you do.